Welcome to Shareholders of a Better World, brought to you by TBLI Group. At TBLI Group, we have an established reputation as an organization dedicated to building the ecosystem of global sustainability and impact investing. We're doing this through educating, advising, and facilitating transactions in global sustainability and impact business, as well as capital solutions for private companies, family offices, and fund groups. For nearly 25 years, TBLI Group has created a vertically integrated ecosystem of education to action through TBLI conferences and TBLI consulting. More about our company can be found at tbligroup.com. This webinar is brought to you by TBLI Foundation, which hosts educational learning experiences dedicated to a better planet. Through the foundation, we build sustainable communities by sharing the people and the experiences making a difference to so many of our lives around the world. Our weekly podcasts bring impact thought leaders that are doing and not only chatting. Now let me introduce my guest today. Hi, good afternoon from our studio in Amsterdam. Before I introduce our special guest today, just some housekeeping explanation for those of you who've never used our system before. If you want to make a comment or a question, just type it in the lower right-hand corner. If you want to send a private message to anyone, just move your cursor or your mouse over their name and a window will pop up. You could send them a private message, and there are 3 emojis, one for clapping, one for laughing, or one if you find brilliant at the bottom. So you can use those. And this is recorded, so you can always watch the replay later, which is sent out usually an hour or so later. So I'm really thrilled today because we have my apologies for the name. It's Professor Thomas Crowther, and who's an ecologist, and he's going to share with us his journey, his view on how nature could be the key to achieving our goals. And I'm really, really looking forward to this. For those of you who are not familiar with Thomas, we never really give a full bio introduction. It's usually on the registration page. But Thomas, thank you so much for doing this. And for those who are from a different planet, who don't know who you are and what you do, inform us.
Great. Yeah, thanks for having me on. I'm looking forward to this chat. I'm an ecologist, so I study ecology, the interactions between organisms and the environment. And historically, I've done that at a very small scale. I was studying for my PhD at the beginning of my academic career. I was studying fungi in Petri dishes and how they interact and do fascinating things. But then over time, as the scope of my research has grown, we've gotten increasingly large scale. And so now we build global models about how plants, microbes, and animals all interact at a global scale to shape the climate and to regulate the sort of functioning of ecosystems that support human life around the world. So we've done lots of work on the extent, that we showed the world is home to about 3 trillion trees. We show the vast fungal networks that connect all those forests across the planet, and we show how those interactions between them influence the climate. So lots of global things.
I want to kind of get into this discussion about biodiversity has no value. It has a specific value, but no one's willing to pay for it. And you're quite critical about the verification carbon credit methodology and system. And your focus is more, we need to restore biodiversity for humanity's sake. And the cherry is the credits. Can you kind of walk us through your thinking around that?
All right. So, conceptually speaking, what's got us into this situation is that biodiversity is the essence of life on the planet. It's what keeps us alive. There's no way humans could have survived 3 billion years ago while we had this, toxic atmosphere of volcanoes and volcanic ash, gases and stuff. It was only the emergence of life and then the proliferation of biodiversity on the planet that builds a livable planet. So it's fundamental to our existence. Everything we eat or use or engage with. 100% of our economy is 100% dependent on nature. And it's biodiversity that provides all these things we need to survive. So, but historically, what we've tended to do is value parts of that biodiversity. So we, in the agricultural revolution, we start valuing the edible parts, or the parts that can give medicines or timber or other services that we need to survive. And as soon as we value them, as soon as they become valuable, we obviously incentivize the propagation of those parts. So if it's, the edible parts, we then form monocultures that are providing very sustainable food production, or not sustainable food production, but they're providing very large-scale food production, which is fantastic, but it comes at the expense of the countless other services that biodiversity provides so that we can survive on the planet. And in reaction to this, over the last 20 years or so, we've had this, that oversimplification of the planet into this vast network of monocultures has led to things like pandemics and climate change and biodiversity loss that threaten our survival. In reaction to that, in order to fight climate change, we've sort of tended to make the same kind of mistake. By building carbon markets and valuing just one other part of nature, we're also incentivizing building massive farms of carbon, which, look, the carbon sequestration in ecosystems is incredibly valuable, but not if it's the only thing that you're maximizing for. And if we build vast monocultures of eucalyptus trees or spruce trees that come at the expense of everything else, it's the same problem. We're trying to fix the problem with the exact same solution. So until we can value the full complexity of biodiversity in all of its essence, in all of its rich complexity, everything that is not a service provided to humans, until we can really value that, I think it'll be hard for markets to really push us in the right direction. The exciting thing is that there is a lot of talk around the emergence of biodiversity markets and nature markets that will put a value the integral health of ecosystems and the biodiversity within it, and if possible, the well-being of people who depend on that biodiversity. And so when we can focus on those two things as the goals, then you'll get your carbon capture as a wonderful byproduct, but it cannot be the goal. The Amazon rainforest has been storing hundreds of trillions of tons of carbon for millennia. And that's not because someone wanted to put a load of carbon there. It's because biodiversity emerged there and because humans live there and thriving with this wonderful, rich system. And as a result, carbon gets locked away in the long term. We can't just recreate it by aiming at carbon only, if you know what I mean.
There's between 4.5 and 5 times more wealth than there is GDP, according to the bankrupt Credit Suisse report. So all of this money is out there. Investors are hunters, and you're talking about teaching farming to hunter. They're incentivized for short-term behavior. How can you incentivize them or stimulate them to look at the big picture of biodiversity first and the carbon comes second?
Yeah, I think in the last 4 or 5 years, there's been this growing understanding of the potential that nature has to contribute to things like climate change and pandemic prevention. And as a result, that has led to a huge amount of interest in investing in nature. The problem with that is it all came through the lens of carbon, or at least in the last 5 years, this explosion came through the lens of carbon. And as a result, people were just we're buying just carbon, whether it's paying for carbon credits or just if carbon is the goal, the sole goal, in many cases that will be very good. But in many cases, as we all are very familiar with, it'll lead to things like oversimplification through greenwashing or any other perverse set of perverse incentives. If instead of, and as a result of that, everyone's now terrified of investing in nature. There's this absolute fear of investing in nature because you could get screwed, you could get abused for being a greenwasher or for having perverse incentives. But ultimately, if you can reframe your goals to be moving away from just carbon so that I can get a credit and more towards redistribution of wealth for the biodiversity that will thrive as a result, then you are getting long-term investment in sustainable futures. So the sort of world we've come to is one where lots of people want to invest. There's lots of money that has the potential to be invested, but everyone's too scared to invest. And so they will only invest in a well-verified, well-successful, large-scale project that's already supported by WWF and has 20 years of drone data, which Best case scenario, you're funding a project that was already fine. Worst case scenario, you're funding a monoculture that's greenwashing. There is very little benefit in all the world's wealth being channeled to 10 or 100 well-funded, well-supported projects. A global environmental movement means redistributing the wealth of our planet to millions of local communities and millions of local farmers and back gardens and community projects, so that the local communities can become economically empowered by nature. So that equation that I mentioned there is the key to the entire thing. Whenever nature becomes the economic choice of people, you can't stop it from growing. I've got some examples a few years ago, we built an organization called Restor. It's like a Google Maps, but for restoration. And what it allows is there's about 150,000 projects on there right now. And you can go on there and you can zoom around the world and see all these farms or projects or conservation projects or restoration projects where people are protecting nature. And what you see is the ones that succeed are the ones that find a solution that makes nature the economic choice. There's some beautiful examples, like in one of my favorites is in Ethiopia. There's a farmer, and this is a very common example. It's just that I know the guy, Dester. He, in all the area around him, everybody's doing intensive agriculture to produce coffee. Instead, he has just protected an existing tropical forest, and he plants native coffee trees in the sunny patches within that tropical forest. And because the forest traps water and nutrients, his coffee trees grow really well. And as a result, the healthier the nature gets, the more productive his coffee gets. So nature is an economic choice for him. And as a result, all the farmers in his landscape are now allowing the trees to recover on their landscapes so they can grow coffee without the need for fertilizers and irrigation. Now, it's not always just let the trees grow back and everything will be fine. There's a different solution in every location on the planet. But I do believe fundamentally in every region of the planet, there is an opportunity for nature to become the economic choice for people. And when we find those solutions, that is when investing in those projects is a wonderful long-term benefit. And we need those investments to help those local communities not have to focus on short-term money accrual. They need to be able to think long term, and when people are able to think long term, they usually build sustainable options, which always benefit nature. So I'd like to see, instead of investing in a few big successful projects, we distribute our funding across hundreds of millions of local initiatives, recognizing that some will struggle, some will fail, and some will thrive, and the ones that were struggling will learn from the ones that thrive, and hopefully it builds a sustainable system.
You're quite knowledgeable and critical of the present REDD+ carbon credit system that's in place with Verra and Gold Standard. And so just kind of briefly, what is wrong with them? And how can it be fixed if you still have lots of money going into this who understand that? What are you replacing it with what?
So obviously, the main concern I've got in all of it is that carbon is the unit of success, and that isn't a very good unit of success. I can give you absolute devastation of land, which comes with really good short-term carbon capture. You can have a load of eucalyptus trees, you'll get loads of carbon. It'll look really good, and if that's your unit for measurement, you'll succeed, even though indigenous communities have been kicked out and loads of biodiversity has been destroyed. What instead we need to be aiming for biodiversity and people, and then your carbon capture is a wonderful thing as a wonderful byproduct. My big concern and look, I'm not strongly, I don't want to be critical. I'm not critical of the organizations that are trying to bring to make a sustainable system or to try and facilitate investments into nature. The only thing I'd mention is that a lot of them were built either not recognizing what tools are available in the scientific world, or not recognize, or they were built before the age of global transparency, before you could see every single tree growing in the ground or every single plant growing on any ecosystem. So what they tend to be is these organizations they'll give you a verification, they'll give you a gold stamp, they'll give you a gold star, they'll say, yeah, this is a really good project. And you go, oh, thank God, okay, I'll give some money there. But you don't see that project, you have no idea who's living there, what biodiversity is there, and whether it's thriving or being degraded. You have very little connection to that land. And on top of that, it tends to always be individual big projects, which I don't particularly support. Instead, what I'd like to see us moving away from this verification process, which is hidden behind weird calculations and paywalls that no one, it's all smoke and mirrors. I prefer for us to all just be transparent. I can show you my garden and every single plant that grows in my garden on any number of platforms. Obviously, the one I would mention is this organization, Restor, Restor.eco. You can zoom into your back garden and see all the plants that are growing there, and you can see how they're changing over time. That is being fully transparent. And if you're going to invest in nature, find 100 projects, and you don't need verification of those projects. You just need to show them so that any investigative journalist can look through them and go, wow, okay, well, half of your projects are really bad. That allows you then, no investigative journalist is ever going to destroy you when you're fully transparent and fully open and recognizing that you're trying your best to invest in a vast portfolio of projects, recognizing that there may be some challenges and some limitations that you want to build towards overcoming in the coming years. That is what transparency is. It's not getting a tick from someone who's done a calculation that you've never seen.
I get it. So your focus is very much on biodiversity and the health of nature, whether it's blue carbon or forest or agriculture or smallholder farm. All of those things are critical to you, and the carbon will come later. But we already have a system in place that as too focused on carbon and not on biodiversity and problems of the verification and greenwashing and lots of negative publicity about them that they're not accurate. But you've got a whole list of large corporations buying those credits to fund these projects. How do we go from where we are now to your biodiversity first, and the carbon will follow?
Yeah, it's very true. So we've had this explosion of the carbon market, and it exists for better for worse. As I say, I'm not fully critical of the process. It's come from people wanting to be
very critical. We don't accept any sponsors here, so people can say whatever they like.
But I want to stress that it's come from people wanting to do good and seeing an opportunity to do good and recognizing that markets have the potential for massive change. And if you can steer those markets in the direction of nature, they are going to do wonderful things. I think every time we have a new creation or a new discovery, there tend to be limitations. And obviously one of the biggest limitations is if you build that market out of exactly the same things that got you into the situation in the first place, which is, I think, what a bit of the carbon market has done. I think there's two steps that we need to move beyond it. The first step is we can already scale those carbon credits by biodiversity. Currently, I realize that biodiversity feels like an amorphous concept, but there are global models of biodiversity that perform well. They're never finished, but they perform okay. We can, with reasonable accuracy, estimate the health of an ecosystem, and that means the health across all of the natural complexity of the species and genotypes that live there. And we can say how healthy that ecosystem is relative to its natural state. Now, what I'd like to see is you've got your $10 of carbon credit, and I'd just like to see that multiplied by the health of that ecosystem first. So I can give you a value on a 0 to 1 scale of how biodiverse that system is. And if it's a 0.1, I'd like you to multiply this by 0.1, and then you only get $1. So you can already use it to scale. Whereas if the ecosystem is fully healthy and a beautiful tropical forest that's been protected in its natural state, that would get a 10 for biodiversity. And then you'd get all $10. You multiply your $10 by 1 and you get all your $10. I think that would be a good way of starting to integrate biodiversity. But as you rightly said, I very much hope that in the next 4 or 5 years, we're going to see nature markets emerging and absolutely overwhelming carbon markets. I recognize that we're all living in our bubbles, and in my bubble, there's a very big, a lot of confidence that nature markets are going to very soon overwhelm and outweigh carbon markets, just because of the amount of, I don't know anyone that's investing in carbon markets that hasn't got some heat. And the bigger and more successful you are at doing it, the more heat seems to come. So I feel like there's this big movement, this wave of nature markets that's going to be coming, in which carbon is one of the parts of your nature measurement. And then I think we're moving towards something that is going to be really valuable.
But
again, carbon is a very wonderful part of nature, but it's a byproduct, not the goal.
But after 27 COPs, I think we're going to COP 28 now, there's hardly any mechanism accepted worldwide for a nature market. And it was hard enough getting Red Plus somewhere, and lots of problems and huge variations in pricings from 1 to 10, just absurd. And the DFIs, government, institutional investors, are not putting any money seriously in nature markets or in biodiversity. I mean, some are talking about it. Yeah, I had a great regenerative agriculture company that had been operating 8 years with proven track record, 5x increase of yield, 3x increase of CO2 concentration, and increase of income for the smallholder farmer. I introduced them to IFC, head of Africa for agriculture. He said, well, I think we can give you $100K for a 3-year feasibility study when they've been doing this for 8 years. So where is the market? You're saying nature market can explode. Is it on the agenda in the Gulf, in Dubai at COP28?
This year it's going to be huge, but in the biodiversity COP, which granted it's not at the same level of awareness as the climate COP, the biodiversity COPs are only about that, and they are increasingly having the representation of all the bigger organizations and the bigger states, and the rich and powerful.
Where's the next biodiversity COP?
Where is this year's biodiversity COP? Last year was the big one in Montreal. I'm not going this year. I think it's in Egypt. Is it? No.
Okay. Now, if you can just let me know, and I'll inform everyone. So you believe that the future are nature markets?
I believe that if markets are going to benefit nature, that nature markets are going to be the way they do it. I still have to admit, I have some philosophical concerns even then. So there's different versions of nature markets. Some are working very well. Costa Rica's Payment for Ecosystem Service program is a nature market. They just distributed millions of dollars to local landowners and saying, look, make your nature more beautiful. And it's had unbelievable economic benefits for the country. There's other, I don't want to name them, but large agricultural organizations that are now paying premiums for nature. So when you buy your product, you pay an extra 30 cents, or you pay an extra 30% because it was from an agroforestry farm rather than a traditional farming system. And those kind of nature premiums for products are another version of a nature product that are starting to work in several of the massive organizations that are having, a huge agricultural footprint around the world. Now, the one that I'm not sure about is the nature credits, because again, it's similar to a biodiversity carbon credit. I conceptually think it would be wonderful if a local farmer can get some extra money for the biodiversity that he's or she has promoted. What I think someone smarter than me needs to figure out is, if rich person buys credit from poor person, rich person owns now a credit, poor person gets $10, great. But the rich person then buys 1,000 of those credits and sells them on to 1,000 other people and gets richer and richer and richer. And this person gets poorer and poorer and poorer relatively so. Then are we just leading to the same inequitable distribution of wealth that led to the degradation of ecosystems in the first place? That's a bigger philosophical concern. But still, what I'd like to see, if markets are going to work, it's going to be in the valuing of healthy nature that will be the mechanism for them to work, I think.
So your focus of biodiversity should be supporting life and restoring health and restoring the social and environmental balance. If we get that right, we will have to worry less about climate. Is that what you're saying?
We will have contributed 30% towards climate change. If we've captured 200, 300, I think there's in the order of between 200 and 300 gigatons of carbon that we can capture if we allow nature to become a sustainable, to regenerate in a sustainable way.
Okay, so you can draw down 200 to 300 gigatons in agriculture, forest, vegetation.
Exactly. If we include allowing forests to recover where they're natural and managing agricultural systems in a more holistic and sustainable way, we're talking somewhere between 200 and 300 gigatons. That's around 30% of our climate contributions. And in the process, we'll be contributing to about 30% of our emissions reduction. We're achieving 30% of our climate goals if we move towards a sustainable future. But those, as I say, are the co-benefit that comes with also allowing life to thrive on our planet. The only reason we want to stop actually, I'll take a step back. A couple of months ago, I was at a meditation retreat led by Christiana Figueres, the lady who organized the Paris Climate Agreement. And she got together sort of 20 people who are sort of interested in nature and
meditating for a long time and not talking. That's unusual.
Yeah, exactly. She does this all the time. She takes people on these like meditation retreats so that they can negotiate in a more. It's genius. She tricked us. I thought it was just a meeting, but then we all just meditated, and it was amazing. She's amazing. But anyway, we had this thing where we were going to, everyone had to give their comment on what they think about the role of nature in fighting climate change, and it ranged from nature has a wonderful contribution and we can't fight climate change without it, all the way to nature-based solutions are an absolute disgrace. They should be banished. They should be banned because they're a distraction from fossil fuel efforts to decarbonize. If you think of nature only through the lens of carbon, then the people on this end of the spectrum, they have an argument. It is a distraction from efforts to decarbonize. If people are going to be planting trees on the White House lawn instead of stopping fossil fuel emission, then yes, it's a distraction. But if you recognize that nature is the life on this planet that keeps us all alive, and it includes all the benefits of climate regulation and pandemic prevention and food security and everything else, then of course that conversation becomes irrelevant. We must save life on this planet because that's the point of all of it anyway. And as a byproduct, we'll contribute to climate change, which will also help save life on this planet. You know what I mean? It feels like the conversation's just got a bit tied up around itself, and we need to be clear that the goal of all of this is maintaining life on this planet.
Well, we kind of go in that track. We launched a Better World Prize, which is basically, I was unhappy with the fact that the ESG measurement system was a kind of a death march in the wrong direction, but going slower. So that was a progress, because you can't have 50 trillion going into ESG, as Bloomberg says, with all of our problems. So we wanted to have what are the best simple measurement systems. And of course, we got about 40, 50 independent approaches to measuring sustainability. And 100% of every single one of the well-funded measurement systems and frameworks all refuse to present. All. 100. PRI, CDP, S&P, World Benchmark Alliance, EcoVadis got $750 million investment. They all refused to present because they didn't want people to see, we're not very good. But so we did have an open library, about that. So if the nature market, as you say, is going to boom, and I think you could be right, but investors are simple souls. They're incentivized for short-term behaviors. They're hunters. They're not farmers. They're hunters. Some are pirates, but in general, they're hunters. So before a system is in place that restoring nature, which is in service of life, resonates with someone who has to focus on AUMs and benchmarks and targets, who is going to finance this transition that you're talking about if they're still in pirate mode?
Good investors. The ones we want.
Who are they?
Hopefully all the people on this call.
Andre Hoffman, the guy that you would go to launch a nature market?
So Andre Hoffman has just donated for a very long time to build an organization called Nature Finance, which is like a governance body bringing together, Nature Finance. Sure. I think they're doing fantastic work in bringing together. Essentially, the goal of that is how do we develop the governance structures around this market that's going to boom, and what are the players that were needed to do that, and how do we avoid all of the chaos that happened when the carbon market exploded before it was ready? So they've made sure that everybody who knows about nature markets and who's ready, who's measuring biodiversity, all the indexes you listed earlier, they are financially facing operations. They measure things like risk, and they measure economic indicators and risk indicators and things. None of them are biologists or ecologists who are measuring what I would say biodiversity actually is. And so we need to make sure that the nature markets that do emerge are underpinned by the knowledge of the experts that are studying those. There are wonderful global biodiversity assessments that we need to be building those frameworks around. And that's what I think Andre Hoffman, in supporting nature finance, has done. We still need big investment into those nature measurements. And if the nature markets are going to be as successful as I think they are, then an investment into a nature metric right now looks like a very good investment to me. It's likely to bring short-term benefits, even though it's facilitating a long-term transition towards a long-term sustainable future. I recognize that there's this time lag, that there's this difficulty in investing in the things that we want to happen, which is a long-term sustainable future, comes at the expense of quick buck now. But if we are going to see these markets develop, then hopefully investing in them now is the thing that will be able, I believe in the next 5 years, every investment in nature markets is going to be one that moves in the right direction in the short term. But I'm not a financial expert.
A disclaimer that for those who do invest all of their life savings and lose it in 1 month, you can call Tom.
Yeah, I'm a professor of ecology. I don't know anything about finance. So.
This Restor.eco, if I was a big forest developer, or I want to develop and reforestation, could Restor Eco give me the insight of the health of 500,000 hectares?
That's what it's built for. Yeah, it's built for everyone between. So the reason that I think 500,000 hectares, you'd get different stuff from a local project to a big project. The local project, what I like the most out of it is you can physically look at it. And I promise you, every ecologist in the world, however brilliant they are and however spectacular they are at using remote sensing data, we can never measure the health of nature as well as you can look at it and see it. If I zoom in on Restore right now, I can zoom into any location on the planet and you'll go, oh, that looks a bit messed up, or oh, that looks really beautiful. And you can tell with a glance. Now, for the larger ones, it's hard to glance at the whole thing. So that's when you have to use Restore to get the metrics like the carbon dynamics and the number of species that live there, and the amount of water sequestration that's happening and the amount of climate regulation that's happening. All of those metrics are measured on Restore, but I still think it's better to just look.
But
so the nice thing is you can do both.
I get that. On the concept of nature markets, there's very little fresh water in the world, very little. Most of it is salt and not easily accessible. 75% of all the water is for agriculture, some even higher. And most of these farmers pay nothing for water. I was once at a workshop with Albert Appleton. I don't know if you know him. He was the one that created the gold standard for restoring the watershed in New York State, because he didn't have the money to put in the filters, and it saved them a lot of money, and it showed the value of nature. And we were trying to figure out ways of trying to put a line item for people that would be paying, that would go to maintain the watershed. So water then in your system of biodiversity is very critical, but everyone's just focused on carbon. Why don't you focus on water, which is an even, we don't have we're getting lots more carbon, but not much more water.
I'd say a lot of local landowners are focusing on water more than carbon, but I would also urge, and water is in many parts of the planet a much better indicator of ecosystem health than carbon. But I would still err away from using water, because again, it's the same thing. If you can just try to describe the health of an ecosystem in one word, you will always undersell what the full complexity of the system needs to be. So even if you get if we made water markets, you'd get people making wetlands everywhere, also not in their natural state. And in fact, the UK government just got absolutely roasted for trying to do exactly this. They tried to build a biodiversity market literally based on ponds. So it was the number of ponds you have. And ponds are wonderful. They newts and frogs and all sorts of things. They're great. But natural isn't just shitloads of ponds everywhere. And so if you make a market that promotes ponds and only ponds, you'll get loads of ponds. Nature is about the full complexity of the system relative to its natural state. And when you get healthy water, you get carbon storage. And particularly in the hot, dry regions of the world, when you get healthy nature, you get really much better water sequestration, which is why nature can survive there in the long term. That's often what we see with these monocultures. They get no water and then they die.
Have ecologists and biologists like yourself and your colleagues who are going to the COP for biodiversity, it's a pity that they're not merging together, which was a comment here from Naoko.
Right.
Can you guys come up with what is a healthy biodiversity or a nature system? You know, is it like a scale of 0 to 100? It seems very complex, and people, you know, it's like people love the David Letterman list of the top 10. So can you give something simply for people to say, hey, I'm in the red plus space, but I like this idea of having healthy biodiversity systems and restoring nature. How do I know that I'm doing it correctly?
Yeah. So there is a, we mentioned nature finance earlier. Andre Hoffman sort of said it. They have partnered with an organization called SEED, which it actually brings together the expertise of thousands of scientists around the world. And that is ultimately based, it's built to ingest thousands and thousands and thousands of global maps that ecologists are making all the time about different components of ecosystem health. And so they measure the number of plant species, the number of bacterial species and fungal species, as well as the genetic variation within those plant and fungal and bacterial species. They measure the height and the connectivity and the structure of the ecosystems. And by collapsing all of that into one metric, you can actually measure the health of every 10-meter pixel on the planet on a 0 to 1 scale. So 0, it would just be a tarmac, concrete block, and 1 would be its natural state. And if its natural state is a natural grassland, then great, or it's a natural forest, then great, or it's not that everything should be a forest or everything should be a mangrove. So it's relative to its natural state. Yes, we can now measure the health of an ecosystem on a 0 to 1 scale for any pixel on the planet. Now, this is an initiative that's bringing together lots and lots of scientists, and it's built to underpin these emerging nature markets. This and there's a few others out there like it, desperately need investment. They need financial support to make sure that they can be scaled and used and work, in a really professional and efficient way that markets can be built on in a globally standardized way. But yes, conceptually, we are definitely ready to facilitate that.
And so you think with relatively small investment in these tools and protocols and sensors, I guess you have to have also permanent sensors on the ground, but you're talking of satellite imaging.
So that's a good point. So this seed thing that I mentioned is built from the expertise of experts all over the planet. So these maps are built out of data sets collected by thousands of scientists on the ground. They're then correlated back up with satellite imagery, and as that satellite imagery changes, it changes the predictions over time. But yes, on top of that, would be then wonderful to build really global networks of ground source data collection. And there's tools like bioacoustics, where you just have a sound recorder and it records the sounds of that ecosystem, or eDNA, where you take a DNA sample from the soil and you can predict how many animals and plants are there. These kind of very scalable sampling approaches also need funding to be able to feed back into that global model and validate it, improve and scale and sort of assess how it's doing over time, so that we can make sure that these markets are based on really rigorous and constantly emerging understanding of ecology.
What is the website for SEEDS?
SEED is just, I think it's called Seed Biocomplexity. So SEED Bio, yeah. So if you search for Seed Biocomplexity, it's the first one on the thing. So again, yeah, it's just a. Yeah.
If you're 25% correct, I'm not even going to give you 50 or 25%. You're talking of a very large transition of not only agriculture and forest and the biodiversity of rainforest to mangroves to everything. You're talking about really change. Farmers, smallholder farmers, are pretty conservative. They're not too crazy about changing stuff. How are you going to get buy-in from them?
I think it starts by money being shipped to the people that are already doing it. There's already hundreds of thousands of farmers, as you know, that you've worked with, that are doing regenerative practices for their own economic well-being because it provides them with sustainable, food or revenue. And those guys are not only providing a sustainable income for their families, they're also helping nature so that the rest of us can survive on the planet. And if they can get a bit of extra money for what the service they're already providing, I think that's a good start. If and when that really scales up and you see other farmers going, wait a minute, I could do with some of that cash, hopefully that will incentivize this move towards whether it's the credit or the payment for nature that would incentivize it, or it's the payment for nature that would enable you to have the time to move towards that sustainable option, then it would be great. The reason people are reluctant to change is that often it takes 5 or 10 years of failure before you succeed in getting to that more regenerative state. I'm not saying it's an easy solution in any location on the planet. It's often 10 years of reduced income before you get to that sustainable ecosystem. And so hopefully these kind of these kind of payments can allow the financial flexibility so that people can invest in a sustainable future for themselves.
But do you see this? Do you see this payment for biodiversity services or biodiversity maintenance, or whatever term you want to give? Is that something that retail informal investors through a robo app investment can do, and then clearing that, or because you seem to be focused a lot more on small projects, really small rather than 500,000 hectare projects?
No, I think both would work fine. I want the small ones because for me, a restoration movement, my concern is that everyone focuses on the 500,000 hectare projects, and then we have 10 well-funded big projects, which isn't a global movement. What I want is to facilitate this burgeoning bottom-up movement where every landowner or every local community is economically empowered. But I definitely see that this can happen at scale. Like, I'm really excited to hear that organizations like Nestle are already, I think I don't know the full stats. I think they invested 1.4 billion in 50,000 of their farmers going from traditional to agroforestry practices in the last couple of years. And if they can then be charging us all a premium to buy those products, and that premium gets paid 100% back to that local landowner, we already have the mechanisms that need to do it. We don't need to build a new fancy nature credit for that to work. So I want every company doing that.
So you're saying we have the tools, there is the framework. Some are a little bit underfunded, they need a little bit more funding. We're not talking about hundreds of billions. I mean, if you look at the climate tech funds, Texas Pacific Group got $7 billion for climate tech funds. General Atlantic got 3.6, Generation 1.6, and then others got hundreds of millions. None of them are touching your space. None of them. Not one. They're all investing in machines that might deliver something in 5 years, but nowhere at the scale that you're talking about, because what you're talking about can happen quickly once you start doing it. I mean, nature can restore itself much faster than building a stupid machine to suck out CO2. The only thing that I see happening in Europe on an incredibly positive movement away from constantly pouring unnecessary growth is Germany's decision to provide public transport for $49 a month, unlimited use, in a country of the biggest car manufacturer in Europe, and everybody talking we got to put money into batteries for the mining and all of this, when it'd be much easier if we have more public transport and people walking, where yours is much quicker delivery. much quicker on, if you're looking at the CO2, which is your cherry, you deliver results quickly, which I think a lot of people don't realize that. They think, oh, we got to wait 20 years to do anything to restore nature.
Exactly. It's funny. I agree with you entirely. Look, again, I'm
First
very pro
person.
the tech solutions. Yeah,
The
I'm
first
very pro the tech
person.
solutions. One of the what are they called? Climeworks is run out of ETH. It was a spin-off from ETH Zurich, the place where
Yeah.
I'm a lecturer, a professor, and I collaborate with them on a lot of projects. I love them. I really like Climeworks, but the founder and CEO, Christoph, and I meet every Tuesday actually for a lunch just to sort of talk about the challenges that we're both facing. And it's crazy. The amount of investment he's getting, it's orders of magnitude more than the entire environmental movement is hearing about. So. And what he's saying is, oh yeah, it's really good because hopefully in 20 years we'll be able to capture as much carbon as a but he's recognizing that. He knows that. And I go, yeah, but at least you guys can measure it very accurately, right? And he's like, nah, not even that. And I'm like, wow, you really are. But it's this dream that one day we'll be able to do huge amounts. And I do believe in 20 years, they will be able to do incredible things. But in the meantime, I'd love for us to save life on this planet. It's like the amount of carbon sequestration we can get before they've even got the technology to do it would be as much as they can ever dream of achieving. And in the meantime, we'll be achieving sustainable livelihoods for billions of people. It's mind-blowing. I think the challenge, though, is you can't do R1 with one big successful company. You can invest in Climeworks, and it is going to do cool stuff. You can't invest in me or an organization, and it will do all of it. I'd love for people to be investing in Restor or donating to Restor or using Restor to do their investments. But it needs to be this vastly distributed system. And the other sad thing is when things go wrong for Climeworks, when they have a month where some filter failed and they couldn't suck out any carbon, no one destroys them in the media because they've destroyed some local livelihoods. Whereas every time a nature-based project goes wrong and someone gets it wrong, maybe they didn't know about the ecology, maybe they didn't know about the social context, or maybe the climate was just difficult at the time, they get crucified. And the amount of abuse that's happening in the environmental movement is way off. And I think that's partially because the media loves a terrifying story, but it's partially because we are so bad on transparency. We're just trusting a few verification companies to go, yeah, I reckon it's good, go for it, just send me the money first. I don't want that at all. We need full transparency in this system, which is so available right now.
With respect to what you were saying, that your climate work sucks up all of the money, and they're going to be delivering in at a magnitude. The difference is so vast between biodiversity, and the main reason why no one wants to put money in is because these are not climate investors. These are unicorn chasers. They're all chasing unicorns, and they see Climeworks as a unicorn because they have an app in that. And I remember I was doing a presentation about this really huge regenerative agriculture lab to a very large family office in Europe that was very keen on agriculture, farming, biodiversity, regeneration. And after 20 minutes of explaining the 5x increase in yield, 5x increase in income, 3x increase in CO2 concentration, longer shelf life, blah, 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 the people said, so what is your business model? And excuse my French, I say, it's a fucking farm. They make fruits and vegetables, and they're helping the farmers and restoring the biodiversity. So where does this family office that was so keen on sustainability, they would prefer to put money into Getir or Gorillas, the 10-minute bicycle delivery, or Climeworks. And that's the issue, is that you don't have an app. And a lot of investors would prefer, can we get rid of the farmers? Let's go to drones and all of this. And it's a big frustration that a lot of the investors see they're just unicorn chasers. I'm going to be doing a little parody on George Carlin, my hero, which on his modern man shtick about the unicorn chasers. But it is as it is, and that's not going to change. But the world has lots of investors wouldn't it be better to try to create a kind of nature-based market exchange, or like a stock exchange, that fills all of the compliance and regulatory stuff, but offers massive money flows going into these projects, as long as people have a measurable level playing field? We know what is a healthy ecosystem. Whether Tom's going to verify, somebody's got to say it is. There's got to be something in place. And you're saying that Seeds and Restor.eco can do that. So there's a lot of moving parts in place. It just needs a packager to put that together, because the financial sector, it's a very predictable group of alpha males. They're not that, it's not that hard to get behavioral change. Have you thought of doing that?
God, you've hit the nail on the head. That is all that it needs. We need a system that allows full visibility and transparency for every farmer and every local community, so that any funder or investor can see them and go, oh, do you know, I'll donate
how
to you.
How far are we away from that? Point one.
The technology, the capacity is 100% there. I think what it would take is in the order of we're talking like a $10 million, $20 million investment to make these things fit together into like an overarching structure. If we could build the entire system for $10 million, I think. The problem is they exist in isolated organizations.
Don't overpromise, because you'll have some people on the line over there that are big movers and shakers. Okay, I'm calling Tom later. I got the check ready.
I'm telling you, $10 million, I could make that system. Granted, it would then need to grow and scale, and it would need incredible business insights and overview and governance and structure. But the basics for what you need is the ability to see everything everywhere and connect to everything everywhere. We have that in Restor. We also need the ability to assess the health of an ecosystem. That they have that in Seed, and you need a governance overview, which is, I think, what Nature Finance does very well. There are many other players that could definitely play a role in that, but what there needs to be is the packaging that pulls it all together, and I think that would be an unbelievably transformative thing.
Because there are many of these fintech companies that are providing kind of ESG payment, where you automatically, so much money is taken out of your retail account and then a portfolio is built. You could probably do something similar, but the focus is very much nature restoration, nature capital markets, or nature markets, or whatever term you're giving that would be acceptable, because I would think there'd be a lot of retail investors if you can give full transparency, and that I realize I can check on my investments and see what's happening there. That there isn't a Walmart being put into this community when it says it's a forest community.
I mean, that already exists. You can do that for free now if you go on Restor. It's just that what doesn't exist is the organization to facilitate the transactions and to do the verification. You can go on Restor now and look at Dester's farm, the one I told you about, and you can invest in them, or you can go buy all of his coffee, or you can do whatever, or you can donate to him, and you can have that impact directly, and you'll have monthly updates on how his farm is doing. But to be able to do that at scale across hundreds of thousands of organizations and get a good summary of that portfolio and recognizing the risks and failures, that just means building an organization that can provide that service. It's fully there. It is not a difficult thing to do, or other than the financial investment that's needed to begin it.
We're coming toward the end of the hour, and I promise you it'd be 60 minutes, and then we'll just do a short virtual mixer where the system will connect you. What can this audience that's watching live now and those that will watch the replay do to help you?
To help us? I think first things first is ask yourself, are you trying to get carbon or healthy nature? And it's a really important one to get clear on before you engage. The second one is, I know everyone wants to do good, but are you trying to do good whilst getting a profit for yourself? Or what's more important, the good or the profit? Because that is a really important, I can't tell you the number of boards I've joined that I then subsequently left because they started, it's someone who wants to do good, and then they go, oh yeah, but only if I can get a profit. And I'm like, oh, well, that might be a bit of a challenge for the next few years. And then they're being like, okay, well, this isn't going to be a fit. So it's interesting to know where you balance on that, the for profit, the profit, the revenue generating versus the good doing, at least in the short term. And then the third one is just, there are nature markets growing and emerging, and if you can angle your investments towards that, I definitely know the people that can help.
Okay. One of the few civilized journalists in our network wanted to join the panel and ask a question to you, Thomas. Jan Lee.
Hi. I hope you can hear me.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. I've been fascinated with the work that you've been doing for a long time. I have an unfair question.
Uh-oh.
I live in Canada, and I live in the rural districts of Canada, of British Columbia. Canada has been a big promoter of biodiversity and many initiatives that it says will promote some of the goals we've talked about here. To the people who live around me, this is great. But when you put the map, for example, on for British Columbia, the places you find that the map on Restor, on British Columbia, the places you find those initiatives, those efforts, are in cities and places where, say, TELUS can do that and things like that. It is a non-starter discussion out here. Here, despite what effort occurs in Vancouver, here everybody still uses wood to heat their homes. They have they don't see the viability of having having heat pumps or anything else that's going to heat their homes because it's too expensive. There is an absolute break between, in terms of discussion on this, this is not an issue that they're educated in. It's what happens in the city. So from my perspective, part of it is connecting those people to that discussion, that promote things like what you're talking about. How do you do that? How do you bring it back down to earth, to the very people whose industries are actually doing the things we're trying to get away from?
Thank you, Jen.
Yeah, that is a great question, and it's the biggest sort of challenge we're facing at the moment. So Restor, the platform you've looked at, it's purely voluntary who comes on. It's just available to anyone. Anyone can come on and register their site and show what they're doing. And by registering, they become visible to funders or donors or customers or collaborators. But we need to reach the rural communities. The rural ones are the ones that are having the closest connection with nature and the biggest footprint in nature. And these are the places where we need economic empowerment and the redistribution of wealth. And so ultimately what we see on Restor is the growth on Restor is very chunky. It ends up being, someone randomly will discover it and then they'll come on, and then suddenly all the farmers in their area will come on it. And then you see them all messaging each other. And often what happens is they're all messaging each other, and then someone trading in some product from those farms then will message them and they'll get involved and a sort of network will build. If that hasn't happened in that rural area in Canada, what I'd really want to try and promote and incentivize is, if you know anyone in the community, anyone in that space, yourself, whoever it is, to actually come on and register. Just draw your site. There's no payment. It's totally free. It takes 2 minutes. It's just like setting up a Facebook profile. But you make that location and then encourage all of those around you. And suddenly what starts happening is the community builds and grows. And then they are visible to all the investors in the world so that nature markets might be able to work. It's the challenging thing is this is a totally bottom-up thing. We don't choose who comes on. They choose themselves. And we're hoping that it just constantly grows.
I'm coming toward the end. I did promise you to keep it at 60 minutes. I'm going to take a group selfie to prove that actually I was working today to my wife, and you can use it also. So just wave to the camera. Tom, you were absolutely brilliant, Professor Crowther. And I want to thank our entire production crew for making this webinar possible. Sam, our producer, Crypto Genius and Ramen Critic, Ricky, my absolute better half with no filter, Xi Jinping, our head of transparency and integrity, Vladimir Putin, our head of conflict resolution, Marjorie Taylor Greene, Nobel Prize winner for stupidity, Elon Musk, our humility coach, and Donald Trump, our prison inmate fashion advisor. So thank you all very, very much. Just if you want to be part of this group selfie, just wave to the camera and it will capture you. And then just wait a few seconds and then I'll go right into the mixer. If you want to join, you're more than well. You don't have to change it, do anything. Just choose the camera and the audio. So thank you all. I'm going to end this group selfie. We can go in. Tom, thank you so much. This has been great. And I'll send everybody replay. If you have any reports or anything you want me to share with those who registered live or replay, just send it to me and I'll send the link to the replay and I'll send you the full version and we'll jump right into the mixer. Enjoy.
Thank you so much.